With question 87 of Prima Secunda of the Summa Theologia, we are now down to our last three questions in this treatise on evil habits, vices, and sins, going to 89 before we start the treatise on law. And this is on the debt of punishment. We talked yesterday about the stain of sin, and this is the debt of punishment. When you think of debt, you might think of something that kind of hangs on, something that kind of burdens you or weighs you down. And that's pretty much what he's talking about, is that when we sin, even after sacramental confession, is there some debt that remains, and why is that the case, and how do we relieve ourselves of it? So there are 8 articles in this question. It's kind of long, but we will zip through it as quickly as we can. Whether the debt of punishment is an effect of sin in Article 1. And it's interesting what he's going to say about this, because he talks a lot about the order of things. Okay, there is a order within our relationship to God and ourselves and our neighbor, and sin is going to disrupt that. And so there's going to be effects, there's going to be consequences of this disruption of the order due to our sin. So that's just a little heads up that that's where he's going to go here. He says, it is evident that all things contained in an order are in a manner one in relation to the principle of that order. Okay, so there's some principle of the order, and then when, like I said, when we sin, we kind of rock the boat a bit, and so that order is disturbed a bit. Consequently, whatever rises up against an order is put down by that order by a principle thereof. And because sin is an inordinate act, it is evident that whoever sins commits an offense against an order. Okay, very interesting, this idea of an order. Wherefore he is put down in consequence by that same order, which repression is punishment. Okay, so when you disturb the order, there's going to be a pushback, there's going to be consequences, and that's what we're talking about here. Accordingly, man can be punished with a threefold punishment, corresponding to the 3 orders to which the human will is subject. Okay, so now the order is being divided up into 3 different orders. In the first place, man's nature is subjected to the order of his own reason. Secondly, it is subjected to the order of another man who governs him either in spiritual or in temporal matters, as a member either of the state or of a household. Thirdly, it is subjected to the universal order of the divine government. Now, of each of these orders is disturbed by sin, for the sinner acts against his reason and against human and divine law. Wherefore, he incurs a threefold punishment, one inflicted by himself, that is, the remorse of conscience, another inflicted by man, and third, inflicted by God. Okay, so again, an order that has 3 different parts to it: ourselves, our lateral relationship with our neighbors, or even somebody who's above us, and then the divine order of God himself. Article 2, whether sin can be the punishment of sin. Okay, can we be punished by sin, for sin, by sin? And he says we may speak of sin in 2 ways. First, in its essence as such. Secondly, as to that which is accidental thereto. Sin as such, in its essence, can no wise be the punishment of another, because sin considered in its essence is something proceeding from the will. For it is from this that it derives the character of guilt, whereas punishment is essentially something against the will. Consequently, it is evident that sin regarded in its essence can no wise be the punishment of sin. Right? So each sin is kind of individual. It's when our will becomes disordered, and so a sin is external in that sense that it can't disrupt I think Thomas is saying it would be a violation of free will if something other than inside us consents to sin, which would be of the will. But on the other hand, sin can be the punishment of sin accidentally in 3 different ways. First, when one sin is the cause of another by removing an impediment thereto. For passions, temptations of the devil, and the like are causes of sin, but are impeded by the help of divine grace, which is withdrawn on account of sin. All right, so God can remove his grace, and that can lead us into sin, as he's going to explain here. Wherefore, since the withdrawal of grace is a punishment and is from God, The result is that the sin which ensues from this is also a punishment accidentally. It is in this sense that the apostle says, St. Paul, wherefore God gave them up to the desires of their heart, that is, to their passions, because to wit, when men are deprived of the help of divine grace, they are overcome by their passions. In this way, sin is always said to be the punishment of a preceding sin. All right, that's really interesting. So God, because we sin, God pulls back his grace, and then it's not that he causes us to sin or that sin causes us to sin, but then our will is weakened, but we still have to have a movement of the will in order to fall into sin, but it's just harder at that point not to sin. Secondly, by reason of the substance of the act, which is such as to cause pain, whether it be an interior act, as is clear in the case of anger or envy, or an exterior act, as is the case with one who endures considerable trouble, the loss in order to achieve a sinful act. I think what he means is that we become weakened. When you're angry, you're more likely to sin. When you're envious, you're more likely to sin. And so sin can result in sin, but not by moving the will, but creating a situation where you're more likely going to sin. Thirdly, on the part of the effect, so that one sin is said to be a punishment by reason of its effect. In the last two ways, a sin is a punishment, not only in respect of a preceding sin, but also with regard to itself. All right, that's Article 2. Article 3, whether any sin incurs a debt of eternal punishment. And he says, yeah, sin incurs a debt of punishment through disturbing an order. All right, but the effect remains so long as the cause remains. All right, so you can probably figure where he's going with this, is that when we sin against God, against the principle of that order by turning away from an immutable good, which is God himself, then there can be an eternal punishment. Article 4, whether sin incurs the debt of punishment infinite in quantity, and again, the infinite good, the perfect good, which we turn away from, is God. We turn from an immutable good towards a mutable good, and therefore the debt of punishment can be infinite in quantity. But there is the point here that it's not irreparable, because the mercy of God is always going to be available, and therefore, even though it's infinite, and it's still we're never beyond the realm of God's mercy until we die and we have our final judgment, right? Article 5, whether envy, every sin incurs a debt of eternal punishment. And as you can expect with this one, well, no, I mean, there are venial sins. There are some sins where we might turn to a mutable good, but not with turning to away from the immutable good. Okay, you might have a little inclination, or you like food too much, or you eat too many donuts, but you're not doing it turning away from God. You're just an over attraction to a mutable good, and therefore it's not going to incur an eternal punishment, but it's still going to be a venial sin. Article 6, whether the debt of punishment remains after sin. Now that's kind of the whole point here, and that's why we have indulgences, that's why we have purgatory, is that this debt of punishment is going to remain. And he says here, if we speak of the removal of sin as to the stain, it is evident that the stain of sin cannot be removed from the soul without the soul being united to God, since it was through being separated from him that it suffered the loss of its brightness, in which the stain consists. Wherefore, the stain of sin cannot be removed from man unless his will accept the order, there's the order again, of divine justice, that is to say, unless either on his own accord he take up upon himself the punishment of his past sin, or bear patiently the punishment which God inflicts upon him. Okay, we must therefore say that when the stain of sin has been removed, there may remain a debt of punishment, not indeed of punishment simply, but of satisfactory punishment. Okay, and again, this is why we, through God's mercy, we have purgatory and we have indulgences, which is a much better way to remove ourselves of that debt without having to suffer the pains of purgatory. Article 7, whether every punishment is inflicted for a we sin? Now, this is kind of an interesting question. I don't quite understand the question, but he's going to say here, basically, do we ever have to inflict the punishment for somebody else's sin? Okay, and I don't know why he words it this way. He says, it happens that one who has not sinned bears willingly the punishment for another. Thus, even in human affairs, we see men take the debts of another upon themselves. Sometimes this is a relation of actual sin, is where a man is punished by God for a man for a sin committed by him. Sometimes it is a relation to original sin, and this, either principally or consequently, principally the punishment of original sin is that human nature is left to itself, okay, and deprived of original justice. Now, remember in that first article, we talked about God removing his grace, and that puts us in a situation where we're less protected, more prone to sin, more prone to act according to our passions. That's what he's getting at here, is that when original justice was removed to Adam and Eve, we fell into the state of original sin, the state of concupiscence, and much more likely to sin once that grace had been removed. It happens sometimes that man suffers the loss of a lesser good that he may profit a greater good, as when he suffers loss of money for the sake of bodily health. He calls this medicinal punishment. And a medicinal punishment is where you receive some kind of temporal punishment in order for a greater good, either for yourself or for others, right? And so that's what that's about. Okay, a little bit confusing of an article. Finally, Article 8, whether anyone is punished for another sin. All right, and he says, if we speak of that satisfactory punishment which one takes upon oneself voluntarily, one may bear another's punishment insofar as they are in some way one. If, however, we speak of punishment inflicted on account of sin inasmuch as it is penal, then each one is punished for his own sin only, because the sinful act is something personal. Then he talks again about medicinal punishment, where we might take something on in order to relieve somebody else's sin. Wherefore there is no reason why one should not have such like punishments inflicted on one for another's sin, either by God or by man, on like children for their parents, or servants for their masters, inasmuch as they are their property, so to speak. Okay, so wrapping this up here, he does say, this is an interesting last little paragraph here. He says, with regard to spiritual punishments, these are not merely medicinal because the good of the soul is not directed to yet a higher good. Okay, the body is for the soul, but the soul is higher than the body. Consequently, no one suffers loss in the goods of the soul without some fault of his own. Augustine says, such like punishments are not inflicted on one for another's sin, because as regards the soul, the son is not the father's property. Interesting. Okay, the body, yeah, but not the soul. When it comes to the soul, that's the higher part of our of our nature, and that is not affected when we are paying for somebody else's sin. Okay, of course, that's where the will and the reason are located. All right, well, thanks for hanging with me. I hope you enjoyed this one. We've only got 2 more questions on this treatise on evil habits, and I hope you'll come back and join me tomorrow. God bless you. St. Thomas Aquinas, pray for us.